Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that completely flips conventional financial wisdom right on its head. We're going to demystify the process of taking luxury goods, those infamous money pits, and turning them into highly calculated, aggressive business tools. We're operating in the complex, high-yield economy of 2026, and honestly, the old rules of holding static wealth are shifting fast. So let's unpack the exact framework to legally make your assets work for you.
So think about this. What if your absolute biggest financial liability was actually your greatest tax deduction? Look, we've all been taught that buying high-end luxury items, supercars, luxury watches, premium equipment, is just a massive drain on your net worth. It's capital you're just never going to see again, right? But what if we challenge that traditional rule today? What if there was a way to legally and strategically leverage those heavy liabilities to actually shield your income?
Here's our roadmap for getting there. First, we'll talk about rethinking the money pit. Second, we'll dive into the IRS brand framework. Third, we cover content as a business utility. Fourth, we'll maximize your write-off. And finally, we'll wrap up with future-proofing your portfolio.
All right, kicking things off with part one, rethinking the money pit and dismantling those old rules of luxury ownership.
There's a massive contrast we need to talk about here. On one hand, you've got the classic myth of the stagnant asset. Imagine dropping cash on a supercar just to let it sit in a garage. It just bleeds capital through brutal, rapid depreciation. But on the flip side, you have to consider the massive opportunity cost of the 2026 high-yield market. If you're tying your cash up in a depreciating car without leveraging it, you're literally losing money twice. You lose once on the depreciation itself, and again on the missed market yields from that tied-up capital.
This is exactly where the strategic asset pivot comes into play. We are not just buying flashy things to show off. We're taking the very items that normally act as stagnant financial liabilities and intentionally transforming them into aggressive, tax-deductible business growth tools. We're taking a perceived negative and turning it into a highly calculated, revenue-generating positive.
Moving right along to Section 2, the IRS brand framework. Let's talk about staying strictly compliant in 2026.
Here's the reality check. The IRS literally does not care if you look cool in a new supercar. Taking it out for a weekend joyride for your own personal enjoyment is completely 100% non-deductible. To claim a legitimate marketing deduction, you have to hit their objective, ordinary, and necessary business standard. You must objectively prove that utilizing this high-end asset is an ordinary and necessary function of your brand's daily operations. So how do we actually pull this off? Well, it boils down to a few core pillars. Say you run a digital marketing agency and you drop $150,000 on a sports car. To secure that promotional vehicle designation, you can't just snap a quick Instagram photo and call it a day. You have to establish a meticulous paper trail proving the asset acts as a functional billboard. And most importantly, you absolutely must directly link the presence and use of that asset to your primary revenue stream. If shooting a viral ad with that car brings in $50,000 in new client retainers, boom, you've established that link. Without it, the whole strategy crumbles. Which brings us to Section 3, Content as Business Utility, focusing on the 2026 creator economy shift.
Look, in today's creator economy, high-end visuals aren't just nice to have, they're virtually mandatory for organic brand authority. Because of this, tax provisions like the Section 179 deduction, which essentially lets businesses deduct the full purchase price of qualifying equipment in the year it's bought, take on a whole new meaning. Same goes for accelerated depreciation. By actively featuring your luxury assets in digital campaigns to generate real authority and quantifiable leads, you are transforming a personal toy into a legitimate deductible piece of business equipment.
What's really incredible here is how you map this justification out over a full year. Think of the supercar or the watch as a recurring character in your brand's narrative. The progression is super important. In months 1 through 3, you organically establish the asset visually so your audience associates it with your brand identity. Then, by months 4 through 6, things heat up. You're actively featuring it in your highest converting ad creatives. Moving into months 7 through 9, you use it for behind-the-scenes engagement to build community trust. And finally, in months 10 through 12, it becomes the centerpiece of your final quarterly lead generation pushes. It is constantly working for your brand. All right, Section 4, maximizing your write-off. Let's talk about proving that ROI to the IRS.
This is the net zero ownership model in action. You've got real heavy costs, a high initial cash outlay, massive insurance premiums, and constant upkeep expenses. But let's look at the other side of the equation. We apply those Section 179 tax savings plus the very real value of quantifiable digital and physical impressions. Let's say your initial cash outlay and upkeep for the year is $100,000. If your tax savings and the real-world value of those new leads equal $120,000, your effective cost of ownership is zero. Actually, scratch that. You just turned a profit.
Now, the IRS isn't just going to take your word for it, right? You have to be absolutely surgical. To survive any potential audit, you implement what's called the wrapped and tracked method, meaning the asset is visibly branded for physical impressions and digitally tracked for online impressions. You deploy modern tracking software. No guessing your hours here, you log them exactly. And you strictly segregate your exact business mileage versus your personal mileage. That level of total, indisputable compliance is exactly what makes this net zero ownership model bulletproof.
Finally, Section 5, future-proofing your portfolio. We're talking exits and scaling. You know, the success of your exit actually begins before you even swipe your card to buy. You absolutely have to meticulously analyze 2026 resale market trends. This entire strategy only works if the asset you select has the absolute highest value retention possible. You've got to ensure the vehicle or timepiece won't hemorrhage its underlying value while you hold it. That's how you keep your total cost of ownership incredibly low when it's finally time to sell. And when it is finally time to sell, you need a rock-solid exit strategy. First up, pinpoint that optimal selling window based on those retention trends we just mentioned. Second, to avoid getting crushed by massive capital gains taxes on a fully depreciated asset, you execute a tax deferral mechanism, like a 1031 exchange. That basically allows you to swap one business asset for another without immediately paying capital gains on the sale. Third, you mechanically roll that preserved equity directly into your next upgraded business asset. It's just a beautiful, continuous loop of value preservation and tax efficiency. And once you've nailed this loop with a single vehicle or watch, you scale it. You get the compliance, the content calendar, and the tracking down to a science. Then you take those massive tax savings we looked at earlier and you reinvest them into secondary assets. Over time, you aren't just managing one cool car, you're building an entire, diversified fleet of fully deductible revenue-generating marketing powerhouses.
So knowing all of this, how are you going to rethink your current liabilities to build your 2026 growth empire? It is absolutely time to stop looking at high-end luxury as an irresponsible money pit and start viewing it as your ultimate business deduction on the path to scaling your wealth. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I highly encourage you to go look at your portfolio through this entirely new lens.